we're live. Welcome back to the Access of Genius podcast, everybody. My name is Blake, brought to you with my co-host, DH, David Henry. And today we're joined by a very special guest, friend, wizard, Brooks, Tyrell. One of our best friends and long time awaited guest. And we're really excited to be here with you all. So welcome to the show, my man. And I think it would be fun, out of my own curiosity, I would love to hear you introduce yourself in any way that you see fit in this moment.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller. My space that I work in and act in is all about climate, all about how business can be actualized to help our changing ecosystems and environments. I've always sort of worked at the intersection and tension points of business, science, culture, and ecology. So I weave there. I've been weaving there for a long time. I've been lost there, and had great success there, and I've had a lot of failure there as well. And in that stew, I act as both a business owner, entrepreneur, in many ways, in technology, in real estate development, in land management, in agriculture, and then I'm also studied and have masters in environmental philosophy, particularly in animisms and mythology and storytelling. So I kind of artistically weave into philosophy, environmental philosophy, and mythos, and in more pragmatic terms, I'm all about how very steady business change can be actualized to help our moving climates. I drink a lot of tea with you guys.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, I feel like there's a lot of different points of entry by which we can kind of get into the dialogue here. But one of the things that could be interesting for our audience and anyone who's in this process of getting to know you, and us bridging the gap between how we know you and how anyone who wants to know you gets to know you, is your namesake of Brooks. And I think one of the first things you ever said to me, where I was like, this man has a lot going on beneath the surface, was actually something about the nature of the river under the river. And there's a couple other tie-ins there in regards to like your study of ecology and like how you've actually spent time in the deep nature field, studying, listening, poking, prodding. I'm wondering if maybe as a starting point, you'd be so willing to kind of riff on what's the river beneath the river and how does that kind of play into the Brooks?
I think one of the most interesting things that I encounter in reading myth is how pluralistic creation stories from any culture that ring bells from you, can bring context into what's unfolding in your life. For me, I have a profound and super deep connection with water, in particular with rivers, and I've done lots of river restoration work. I did a whole master's thesis on how animism and river restoration can sort of collaborate. But I think the deeper search within that is the river underneath the river, the riparian nature, the aquatic nature of how our life stories are unfolding. So by engaging with a river in a very actual sense, whether it is a business that could support rivers or actually going and building beaver dams in a river, there is a then mirrored story that's being told within yourself of like, wow, I can contextualize my own unfolding by this natural system that I'm participating in. So the river underneath the river is this, as you do river restoration, you're also restoring the river within yourself. That these very real, it doesn't need to be so far-fetched, these great like spiritual contexts or creation stories, that they can be as simple as tending a river in the world and tending the river within yourself. And yes, my namesake is brook, is a creek, so there's layers there that help me understand. But I think those subtle understandings of like, oh, my name is a brook and I'm drawn to rivers and my inner world can be contextualized by a river. I can I can understand myself more by my engagement with the natural world, or with anything really. But that's a fine, like, golden thread for me, is when there is that relationship between what I'm doing with my hands or with the world and what is unfolding within me. And when those are in pair, I'm usually in a good place. And often they're not. And that's usually when I'm confused.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I love this so much, and in my view, you are someone who is one of the most integrated individuals that I know. And what I mean when I say that is, like, there's so many different facets to you. You wear so many different hats, and you're deep in the business world. You were a lax bro in college. We still watch football, and you are one of the deepest, most mythopoetic wizards that I know. And I could go on, but just really, you can't. I can't label you because you wear so many different labels, and it's something I appreciate about you so much, and I think it's so beautiful, and I try to do the same. And so I'm curious because my assumption is that you weren't always as into myth as you are now, and um, and so yeah, I guess I'm curious to know within these past years, however many years it has been, of really going deep into myth, into the river beneath the river, so to speak. Like, how do you see the immense value of myth in the human story? And I guess how it infuses all these other aspects of life, and because it's just an embedded part of who you are, how it also influences business and things like this. And I guess some of these arenas in life that you can see are so void of this sort of mythic nature in the river beneath the river. And so maybe the elevator pitch on why is myth so important, and how do you see it really infuse its way into your life in beneficial ways?
I mean, the only thing I would push back on you on is I think I've been into myth forever. I think, we joke and jest a lot about Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, but for me, that's the original mythology that I tuned into. That's the original hero's journey or track that I was tuning in and understanding good and evil and etc. Right? I think, but in some ways, my deeper love of myth has been more awakening to, like, how I can actually contextualize what I was saying earlier, contextualize myth into my own story and unfolding story, or culture's story and unfolding story.
Mm-hmm.
A very short, a very, very short story of my own is, in a very interesting and confusing and challenging time in my life, I was told by a wonderful man the Norse creation myth. And the very, very short of it is, fire and ice are colliding in the universe for eons. And after so much time, there was all of a sudden a crack, a fissure, a like change in between the fire and ice. And that is where God planted the tree of life. Right? It's a beautiful story, and the yew tree grows, and that is sort of one interpretation of the dawn of our earth and our world.
In the crack.
In the crack between the fire and ice. And there's so many ways you can yarn about the meaning and all of that. But for me, in that moment, when I heard that story from that voice, I said, oh my goodness, this is what is unfolding in me. This was this, interaction with fire, and then this interaction with water, and it was like the perfect contextualization of the story that was unfolding within me.
Mm-hmm.
So this understanding that really buried myth in me was that creation myths in themselves are actually stories that are just happening to us. And I think we all sort of interact with different stories, and I think that's a really big way that people find their religion or find their myths or the stories that they love, because I think they see some of themselves in it. And in that way, I see myth as maps. I see myths that you really connect with as sort of maps that you can find out where you are or going or were. And that, to me, that anchors of why I read lots and lots of mythology.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is fascinating, man, and I feel a thread that I want to pull on, and it's a shot in the dark, but let's see where it goes. So this idea and the image of it's in between the fire and the ice, like in the crack between that the tree of life is planted, right? And it reminds me of something that you were speaking to yesterday of the like the poles between, was it protons and neutrons? And it's like within the like the space between of when they flip kind of idea, that like that's where whatever you want to call it, the animate force dwells. Like that's God, that flipping. And it, for whatever reason, it makes me this idea of the space between, within the crack between the fire and the ice. That's where the tree of life is planted. Somehow they feel like there's a thread between the two. And so I'm just curious if that tracks for you, and maybe you can unpack this idea of just like the animate force dwelling within the space between, or that.
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind that we've been talking about this weekend that I really love is the explanation of the non-exclusivity of cosmologies. That because the Christian God and the Christian mythos says that 6,000 years ago the Earth began, and that's your point of view, and that should exclude all other point of views. I think it's far more exciting and interesting to see where, in the non-exclusive understanding of the overlaps of all of that. And I think one of the ways that happen is, like, it is talked about a lot in Fritjof Capra's work. He wrote the Tao of Physics, which is one of the first massive books that said the Tao and modern physics from the 70s of quantum theory are saying the same thing. And, that's something that's talked about a lot, and it's not novel, but I think creation myths, if you want to stick with the Norse one, that is not exclusive. It's almost describing the Big Bang, you could really say, in some ways. It's like these poles of energy got some sort of spark that you want to call divine, or you want to just call atomical, and then created more, right? So I think there's something really interesting to take that. So that's creation myth, which is a little more like Big Bang creation. But then we can talk about ecosystems. We can talk about how just the opposing forces of fire and water, and how actually that's just a dynamic that is playing everywhere at a solar level, at a cosmological level, at a cultural level. So that these principles that we're seeing that are just storied so well in myth, I think we often, in many ways, that's like a better look into the map of the psyche and dynamics of the universe and sciences, because it roots in our personal experience as much as it does in, like, oh yes, that is unfolding.
Yeah. One of the things I want to ask you about, this is a little bit of a left turn, but it actually feels related because it's riffing on polarity, the different elemental forces and how they come together. In a way, it ties in football. And one of the things that many people listening might not know is that you also have a background in elite athletics, lacrosse, football. And the tie-in here, which I want to invite you to riff on, because I think it's a really important theme within just the general exploration of healthy masculinity. A lot could be said about like the plight of young men, or just men in general right now, in terms of the lost forces and people trying to find meaning, connection, but specifically the healthy competitive drive. And I'm wondering if you could touch on how you relate to like the healthy masculine competitive drive, like the get it drive, because I feel that in you and I love that part of you. And also you have an uncanny, heart open, cooperative, synergistic, what we might consider to be this more like ecological approach. And it feels like there's often this Cartesian split between, you're either going to be like full on competitive drive and sort of this split between like, I'm doing that and fuck everything else, or I'm in like the ecosphere and I can't relate to this other world. But as Blake was just touching on, that dichotomy is completely harmonized in my experience of you. They coexist naturally, beautifully. There's a space at the table for all of them. And how I experience you, which for me is liberating when I'm in your presence. It feels like a liberating force out of which all the parts of me get to be present that dance and play in those ways. And so I guess I'm specifically wanting to hone in on the competitive aspect and like how this polarity ecosphere relates of like where, say, toxic competitiveness meets healthy competitiveness, and just kind of that masculine drive, if that makes sense, as like a general overarching question.
I think, I don't want to speak in circles here, but I can really stay with the Norse myth on this one, because I think that one found me in a time where I was feeling, I was in England. I was getting my master's in environmental philosophy. It was a really watery time. I say it was the most feminine I've ever been in my life. I was skinny. I was barefoot. I was long haired. And I was at philosophy school. I was at Hogwarts. And water was so full. And I think I was going through the cycle of my feminine expression coming up because I had such a eruption of competitive drive, being an elite athlete, being a Division I athlete, where being as big, as strong, and as mean as possible, and putting a helmet on to essentially practice war every day was what I did. So I do see this natural thing of doing what your life is calling in that moment. Like I'm very thankful for my my dips into the waters, but I think a lot of the mistakes I've made was then the thinking that was right and my fire was wrong. That there is a repression of one dynamic in order to let the other flourish. I think it's natural. But I think as I sort of have gone through that cycle, and for the sake of that story arc, I believe I'm now watering the tree, right? Or tending that tree that God planted, and I'm just becoming the flourishing human that I hope to be, and all that.
Yeah.
And I think in that, realizing how much space there is for fire. One of the things we talk about a lot and do a lot is I practice Japanese martial arts. I practice Aikido. And mainly that is to integrate the just deep competitive nature that I have. For so long, my anger was fire and fuel for success, which I find is really interesting, because there's a toggle with control and out of control that I've experienced a lot in my life. But I think that edge is such a wonderful thing to explore as a man, to not fear the lack of control, but be like, whoa, that's an edge for me. And one of the questions that you've asked me that has inspired me a lot, as I've gone through certain things, is like, when was the last time you felt really sane? That's a great question you've asked me. And there are moments and all that, but some of the times I've truly felt the most sane is when I've been the most competitive and the most like motivated and on fire to reach a goal. And this is in particular as an athlete, where nowadays I'm kind of like, oh yeah, that's not the ultimate goal, is to be a premier athlete. But in that moment, it didn't really matter about the goal. It was just that I was like severely motivated to be big and strong and win, right? And like I saw how I repressed that in other ways because of my own thing I needed to do. But man, some of the best moments of my life are when I was just so extremely motivated to be good at something, right? And so I think that competitive drive can be harder to tap into. Like when I was an athlete, my whole life was athletic, so it was very easy to just go for it in that sense. But now I think practicing martial arts, for instance, it adds that sense of discipline and competitive fire, even though Aikido preaches non-competitiveness, which is interesting. It's sort of like the peaceful warrior way. But again, that's a perfect example, right? That's an evolution of what is just a fiery athletic, like I'm going to go out and I'm going to hit somebody, to now I'm more like, okay, I have gone through this process of being fully watery and feminine. So now that you do that, you don't all of a sudden fire back to playing football and hitting people, but you have a more integrated and holistic way of expression. And I think Aikido is a wonderful example of that, because it is a warrior. You're practicing with swords and you're fighting, but it is non-competitive. It is peaceful. It is so right. That's a whole view of like competitive competition integrated with peace, right? So I think you need to have both of those at the table. There's not many spaces where you're allowed to do that, but just that subtle acceptance of both sides of yourself has been huge for me, and really hard. I'm still, struggle with it, but it's key.
Yeah.
I love this, and I haven't heard the fire and ice is between the crack of the fire and ice is where the tree of life is planted, but that just feels like the kind of access mundi of this conversation. And yeah, I'm super curious to hear, because I hear what you're saying, that there was like this deep download of the competitive edge, high athletics, things like this, but then maybe it's become more of an integrated, peaceful warrior competition, but not wanting to just absolutely destroy someone on a field. It's different now. But I'm curious how you feel maybe your competitive edge, this like deep drive within you, expresses itself in arenas outside of just exercise or like Aikido. Like I'd say you're a highly successful individual. You're really driven in what you do. You operate with a deep desire to be of benefit to life on Earth and this planet. So I'm just curious how you feel your like competitive nature, and maybe competitive is not even the right way to say it. More of like your intensity. Like how does that show up now that you're not playing the cross and maybe outside of something like Aikido?
Yeah, the word right before you said intensity, I would say that I do, for better or worse in some of my relationships, but I do draw a lot on intensity. I think I'll often find my eyebrows furrowed in sort of a, like, I apply intensity to whatever I'm doing. And I think when I don't do that, I have a harder time with motivation, or I have a harder time with whatever I'm doing. Like I said, for better or for worse, I think intensity should be controlled in that way. But for me, I contextualize it as pragmatism. Like my intensity and motivation and competition is the pragmatic side of whatever I do in life, and maybe the more watery, love for the earth is more of my guide and my compass, right? And so I don't think the two need to fight or conflict with one another. There's this like side of me that is intensely loving the earth and really just wants to be of benefit and help. Mm-hmm. And what I've realized in so many ways is that's not enough. Mm-hmm. It's not enough for me to just love and care. I have to also apply this like pretty intense pragmatic, and this is another thing that's really hard, and I'm not, I'll be practicing this forever, but that intense competitive drive is the pragmatic tools in which to actualize my love. Mm-hmm. I had that in a little bit anecdotally is coming out of Schumacher College. Mm-hmm. A year of environmental philosophy. My heart was bursting for the earth and animism, and I was like seeing the world as alive more than I ever have, and feeling so refreshed and like, wow, I've really started to cultivate a cosmology that I can walk for a long time. Yeah. And I felt so restless and lost in how to actualize this. Mm-hmm. And this is something I think of and talk about a lot, but in the environmental world, there's so much love and care and thought, but action is missed a lot. And I don't need to go into this side of culture of like a lot of our pragmatism and intensity is then channeled towards let's just call it some hardcore business and it forgets the heart, right?
Yeah.
So I really, really tried, and again, like tried and failed, truly, to bring both those together, to have that like, okay, here's my compass in it, but I need to bring the intensity in.
Yeah. Well, I actually kind of want to double click on the compass here for a second, because actually I think the first time we ever synced up in person, you actually brought an alchemical compass with you, and you placed it on the altar, and it was like one of these moments where like, oh shit, like that's something I've seen in a dream, or like maybe like in an anime somewhere, and I was like, okay, there's like an actual alchemical compass here, and I think it had the symbols of the elements, and there's like, you know, these different dials and stuff on it. And I feel like I want to tie this into something you touched on earlier, which we were riffing on yesterday. You touched on it briefly in the sort of intense excitement around how for yourself you see different worldviews kind of simultaneously coexisting in a beautiful way. Say like the creation myth that say the earth is 6,000 years old, coinciding with the earth being 4.5 billion years old. And I'm wondering if you could kind of yarn on how these different things play together in terms of a worldview where all these things, in a sense, are being wed together, where we don't have dichotomies that split us between hardcore business and the heart. We have both. We have a sense that we can deeply appreciate one worldview that could be 100% correct. You'll, I hope, elucidate on how you feel these different worldviews have their mythic and beautiful sequences in terms of like ways of seeing and appreciating them. But yeah, I guess I'm wondering, could you touch on what you were riffing on yesterday with the 6,000-year-old, riffing with the 4.5 billion years old, and then also how that kind of ties in with the alchemical compass?
Indeed. I mean, first, the alchemical compass is a gift and creation by the now past Dr. Stephen Harding, who was an alchemist, a scientist. He was one of the fathers of Gaia theory, which was the scientific proof, or the scientific theory that the Earth is a self-regulating system, which thus implies sentience. So that truly the Earth is never allowing its temperature to go higher than life can exist or lower than life can exist. And that saying this is proving that there is sentience involved, that the Earth is self-regulating and thus self-aware for life to flourish. And Stefan is, amazing man. And he built this compass, which was it's a dial where you're dialing in the earth elements, the alchemical elements, and Jung's four senses. And I think it's actually well brought up, because I think it's a beautiful example where in alchemy, there's the combination of different things. And, alchemy is a metallic science as much as it is a philosophical understanding. I mean, I remember I went for one walk with Stefan, and he contextualizes another sort of example of contextualization was he contextualized my life based on the stages of alchemy, right? So there's the, I'm going to mess this up, 10 stages, which is, calcination, and you burn, exactly. Yeah. And he's like, oh yeah, you're there, you're stage 6, you're you're soup, you're melted, you're lost. Yeah. Right. But I think it is a great example of just this. It's like, wow, we can apply so much of one worldview into the other, and I don't think that they're mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
That the yarn yesterday, we were just curious about, like just that really rigid view of like in Christianity, of which I read and encounter and participate in what I read and study. It's part of my cosmology, that the Earth started 6,000 years ago. It's like, wow, that's quite interesting, because we have very clear science. And Dr. Stephan would talk about this a lot, that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and it's creation myth in that way. And it's a really interesting thing to say, like, how can those both exist, right? Like, why do they need to be exclusive? And one of the ways that we're speaking about it yesterday is that on a cosmological or astronomical understanding, the Earth has been around for 4.5 billion years old. Like we can prove that one. And our role in this ecosystem, our role on this earth as an animal is quite interesting. I mean, we make, we create, we can tend ecosystems, we can build homes, we can help other animals, we can destroy, we can destruct. So in this very animalistic view, we are just playing a role in this sort of like solar system, drama that's unfolding. But then it's very interesting, I think, to think about our role as, interacting with spirit, as the humans have just like an amazing ability to sort of interact with divinity. And I'm sure so do the whales, right? Like, it's not just us. We had some good whale talks. So when Christ arrived, or when, maybe it's even more like Genesis, when the word was spoken, or Adam and Eve was playing out, that in itself is a creation and was the beginning in lots of ways of our current consciousness and our current culture and our current mythos, ethos. Everything in a lot of ways has unfolded based on that 6,000-year timeline. So in some way that is a little more heady or noosphere, or talking about the egregores of this earth, or like our zeitgeist, did start 6,000 years ago. And there was a creation moment that is now unfolding based on that line, that I don't totally say no if someone says the earth started, or this story started 6,000 years ago. I think in many ways it did. So those don't need to be mutually exclusive. And it's very nuanced, and it's a very hard thing to just like say. There's so many holes in what I just said, but it's so much more exciting. It's a way more inclusive and interesting perspective to embody, to, be pluralistic in your cosmology.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're articulating this, because even though I'm not aware of the holes in what you're saying, I feel like even the gesture towards bringing both in, and to follow the line of a creation story and to track how that's moving through humans. It reminds me of this line from Andrew Holacek, who's really deep into Tibetan Buddhism, but also really deep into dreams, and bringing all this integral philosophy together. And he basically had this riff. He's like, yeah, scientific rationalism is like the punk rock kid on the block that's just taking all these mythopoetic renderings of reality that humans have been doing for thousands of years and just being like, fuck you, we know better. Mm-hmm. And so I love the gesture of like, well, let's really see how we can bring all these together in a way that's deeply honoring, deeply curious, and also, in a way, I feel like contending with this binary tribalism, which I feel like that's such a beautiful and important gesture in this time, because it's really difficult to contend with the lack of nuance that's often drawing bright red lines to it's either this or it's either that, and to like keep nurturing a worldview in which there's more inclusion and more possibility for how this dynamic ecosystem is playing through all of our lives, and the stories, and where did these stories really come from, and how they're really influencing what we're all up to. It's a beautiful gesture.
Yeah, I think to get maybe more granular, like we're talking like really, really high up, right? To get granular on my experience, my thesis work, my master's thesis was really focused on how embodying the perspective of animism, so we can kind of go back to that watery understanding, the compass of animism, can interact and interplay with restoration ecology. Very reductive science, right? Like, very much you do this, you do that, right? And I think this dynamic is so interesting, of when we're often just talking about not putting exclusivity in how we do things. Just in general, I think it's a beautiful idea. And again, it's like the creation myth. It's, if you're just working with fire, there's no creation, right? It's like a lot about bringing together maybe their opposing forces and finding a way to work with. In the animism, there's a lot of, I was working with a forest and saying, well, how interesting, what if we embody animism? And as so many cultures do actively, but I was curious about my own experience of going into a place and saying, this viewpoint of animism that this whole earth is alive, that this forest is alive and sentient and capable of inquiry and response, and that there's a very potential of communication with this place through synchronicity, through sort of like poetic happenings, and embodying that more watery understanding, and then saying, cool, and I'm going to take that information and then use intensity, use anger, use this more fiery understanding of science in building beaver dams in a thing. It's very deductive. I needed to choose to put a dam there and a dam there, and then around that I was building labyrinths and altars around the place, which was more just like infusing animism into this act. And I was always just trying to hold both sides and not have them be exclusive and see where it happens. And I think in that example, the simplest way to describe is I found that my science, my enacting of science, completely boosted my connection with animism. I was like, by doing and giving and acting, my like heart opening and connection to the place was just like blasted open. And vice versa, my listening and my action, it made me care in such a deep way, and I worked harder, or I was like a little more intense. So there's this, I think we often lose that, just like how opposing forces are actually beneficial for one another. And I think that's just an awesome, right? That's the Norse creation myth. That's what it's saying. And I think that's just applicable. It's what we're talking about. How do we bring intensity and competition to our water and our compass? It's like everything we're talking about, I think, is the exact same principle.
Yeah, I love this so much. I love what you said. Like without the ice, there's no creation. Without the fire, there's no creation. And it makes me feel like they're like spells that become integrated, that you know when to wield which one. Like there's a place for the deep science to come out, and then there's a place to build the altar. But without the other, it's incomplete. And so knowing when to use which one, how to use them, and it makes me think about something that you said. You said, you went to grad school. Well, you got your undergrad in business, right? So you got your undergrad in business, and then you got grad school in ecology. And that was your grad school, was your watery, your feminine, your deep awakening to just love of the earth. And I feel that within you. Like I feel this deep, insatiable thirst to be of benefit, to move in harmony with the earth, and to restore these ways of being a human being. And you mentioned that, I might get your words wrong, so correct me if I misspeak, but you mentioned that there's a lot of people who have the love for the earth and of wanting to be of benefit, but then get stuck when it comes to actually taking pragmatic steps towards actualizing solutions to fulfill this love and how that love for the earth wants to express. And, I see you as someone who's just fully in the pocket of pragmatic solutions, of really trying to express your deep love and desire to be of benefit in really practical ways. And I think that's a really needed thing. And I guess my very my high level projection of some of these people who maybe have the love but have a hard time with pragmatic solutions is that because of the nature of the playing field of our society right now, one of the major avenues of creating solutions is being in the arena of capitalism. And so we have this deep love and desire to be of benefit, to be of service and solutions. But then because one of the main avenues, not the only avenue, but a big avenue in our playing field, is to be in the arena of capitalism, to play the game of capitalism. And if you have an idea that capitalism is inherently bad, then you're not going to play it. And so it's like, I want to be of service, I want to create solutions, but the place where I would create solutions is inherently flawed. So then it's kind of like my hands are tied behind my back, and there's not a lot of space for practical solutions. So we've been talking about this, and I'm just curious if you could riff on that a bit, and kind of in the spirit of bringing these poles together and seeing that they actually can work beautifully together. So, for example, business and the deep desire to be of benefit to the earth, and how they don't they're not mutually exclusive. There is maybe a way to actually bring them together in a way that is beneficial. So I'm curious if you could riff on that, anything that comes up for you there.
And I'll just add into this mix here. This is a great question. That I said something positive about capitalism, and y'all witnessed me get slammed yesterday. Like, we had a friend do a straight up rap. What would we call that? Like a rap unload?
Diss track.
It was a diss track. It was a diss track on me. So I got served. I got schooled.
That was my initial thing. I feel like you're setting me up to get attacked here.
Yeah,
Because this is the nuanced one. I
everywhere.
One of the things that comes up and that I just want to be careful to not speak to, and to say that there is a way, and I know it, for like how someone should be to interact with both. I think being in this space a lot, I know a lot of activists. I know a lot of business folk. I know a lot of artists. And I think activists need, if that is their role and that is what they are supposed to be doing, I think holding an oppositional radical view is an important thing for like the larger balance of how things can shift, but it is not my way. I feel I have a unique story in that I've gone to business school and I've run businesses and I have this earth thing. So I feel a particular role to kind of be wedged in the middle, and if anything more in the business world, because I can wear that hat. So if anything, there's more of an ask or a curiosity for somebody to find their own role in that, right? And yes, I think positive or radical neutrality is a very, very helpful guide to not get too fed up and get lost. And let's just say being an activist and, F capitalism. And, I think that's exclusivity, not non-exclusivity, which is what we're talking about. So I will stick to that in that way. But I mean, the whole thing that we're talking about now is if you just say screw capitalism, I won't engage with it, then in some ways you're rejecting the fire and you're just working with water, right? So it's a really difficult one for me to say. Like, I don't know the the antidote to that whatsoever. I'd say the more I've had this interesting experience of I've run a real estate development company where we were doing all sort of like holistic, sustainable construction. And in that there was a lot more capitalism, and it was like there was like a chef's kiss of sustainability. And I felt like I got spit out by the belly of the beast and was like, whoa, capitalism was consuming me. So then I went to Schumacher and I went to wizard school, and I was like all the way in this like consumed by this like ecological heart and making change through artistry, which is incredible. And then I just like spat myself out of there and was like, whoa, that was too far for me. And was like, where's the action? Right. And so I really don't know how to answer that question of just like continuing to navigate. And I'm just like in transitional moments, just continuing to navigate of like, I learned that was too far that way and then too far that way. And yeah, where to go from there.
Yeah, I think something that you're speaking to that's really important. And just to say, I feel like the listeners are probably like, dude, Blake just every episode's like trying to shove in their mouths like capitalism's not bad. But it's it's an alive thing for me, because I operated for a long time, I think, with a deep belief that there was something wrong with it. And there's more nuance that I feel like is can be really helpful for people to kind of uncuff the chains behind their back and allow them to move more freely. But I think something that you're speaking to, which this is a complex topic that you named beautifully, is like this idea that we each have ecological niches. Like as an individual, we each kind of have this like ecological niche. And so this idea that, like you said, we're all playing different roles. We all like have different parts to play. And I think there are people who are being asked to be more bridges, like yourself, to really be in the middle, to really hold both in a maybe a bigger way. some people are here to maybe play the game of capitalism in a much bigger way than other people. And I think, there's some people who, obviously we are all embedded in capitalism, so you can't not somehow participate in it. But I think we're each called to participate in different ways. And so, like you're saying, you're not offering a one-stop shop. This is how you need to live your life within capitalism, which I appreciate. But I do think that what you're speaking to and is really important, because no matter what your role is, I think for people to, and again, this might not be true, but it's kind of what I believe in this moment, for people to come to the place of seeing that it can't, and there's many examples where we see it in a beautiful way, where we see capitalism has been wielded in a way that has led to goodness, that has led to benefit, that has led to good projects that are, operating in good ways with the earth and things like this. So even one example of that is enough to say that, okay, so there is a way. And so I think just acknowledging that can be so incredibly liberating for people to just feel into that. Okay, even if that's not my role to play it in some massive way, the idea that it is possible. And so, people who might judge you or judge me for even saying this, just to hold that maybe their ecological niche is different than mine, and that's okay. And yeah.
You're definitely getting a diss track written about you.
Yeah, I was feeling that too. You're gonna get slammed.
Okay, let's go. Finish our virality.
Yeah. Anyone who wants to slam Balake, let it rip. You said something good could come of capitalism. You're fucked.
The only reason you're watching this is because
You need the money. Maybe we're gonna edit that out. Just kidding. No.
Yeah, I will just say, it's funny, even talking about this or bringing this question up is okay, everything that we were talking up to this point was cool, it was fun, it was easy to talk about. Even that question, and maybe this is just me, but I can feel there's a different quality in the air. It's we're touching on something that maybe is a bit more touchy, that we want to be a bit more careful with the wording and things like this. And I think that's just, it's fascinating to track that within my own system, that there's a slightly different level of intensity of talking about that topic. And I think it's incredibly important to have these conversations, to be able to wax on the mythopoetics and things like this and go deep into the earth, but to also bring that conversation in. And so I just feel that it's incredibly important and valuable. And even if we may be talking about it in ways that in 2 years we'll realize was unhelpful, just the willingness to at least open the conversation, the willingness to share what you believe. What is your current thought process behind all this right now, and daring to claim something about it with the willingness of maybe being wrong. I see it really important and valuable. So I appreciate you answering the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like we might be kind of in the vicinity of starting to land the plane here, though, just tracking our energies and stuff. But I do feel like there's something to be said about the preciousness or the great good fortune of being able to hang in places of nuance and to nurture nuance, and to be able to have the specificity or the granularity, to have direct relationships and to know people's views or to know their stories, and then from that place be able to unfold nuances and the unique niches that people inhabit. And so I do feel like this conversation is one of many good gestures in that direction, of just continuing to champion nuance in a world that seems to be somewhat awash in generalities, and to some extent awash in abstractions and kind of bright lines drawing people towards tribalism, take this side or take that side. But I think in that wax, just in terms of championing nuance and just working with what we perceive to be the zeitgeist, I do feel like I want to ask one question about power, in the sense of, one of the things that I experience in our, say, watery culture is the sense that we can play a lot in the abstractions, or we can play a lot in sort of these hard-won spaces of freedom. We've been riffing on this idea of whoever, John Adams or Samuel L. Jackson, who said that John Adams, my father studied war and politics so my son could do math. And then my, son's son could do poetry and stuff. And we were on a yarn with this yesterday where it's like, there's certain ways in which generationally things happen and then, great good fortunes manifest from this. But I guess what I'm wanting to kind of hone in on is, and in a way, I feel like this is maybe something you're pointing to with your question as well, Blake, which is how do we strike this balance between, in a sense, like fully savoring the uniqueness of our lives? And I feel like many people who are listening to this kind of podcast, likely, if they were to really take a deep breath and look around their circumstance, would have so much countless great good fortune and areas of focus or areas of opportunity that it would be like, somewhat of like a emperor's awakening to be like, oh my gosh, I'm living the kind of lifestyle that, a king 500 years ago would dream of, so to speak. But at the same time, recognizing that many times our lifestyles drift away from where true sources of power are accumulating. And I've had this image lately of like the Hunger Games, in the sense of like there's these dynamics where like power is accumulating in these different areas, but then the people are like bloodthirsty for each other, where we're destroying each other because we didn't talk about capitalism correctly or something like this. So I know I'm throwing a lot out there, but I feel like there's something around just touching on like power, our role, nuance.
One of the things we talked about yesterday, which is living in at Schumacher in a sort of like flat power, everyone's a leader, everyone has a say, very non-hierarchical. And in that, I think you realize how useful hierarchy can be. Like there's this thing where it's like, wow, not having a leader is really hard to get stuff done, right? It's like, so I think there's that radical opposition. It's like, hierarchy is terrible. It's like, yeah, it's absolutely a source of oppression in this world, and generally is. Capitalism is a massive, maybe the main source of oppression in this world. So right, there's not a right or wrong, but there is a usefulness or a pragmatism to some of these structures. And man, I don't know if we're just too deep in it, in being used as tools of oppression, to ever like be able to say, maybe it is too poisoned to say that capitalism is a good thing. I don't even think I would be able to say that. But I find that power structures can be useful. I mean, man, I'm not too educated on this, but like you can think of the caste system, right, as like a very ancient religious understanding, fully embodied religious understanding. Your dharma and your karma is to incarnate exactly where you are, and there's a great acceptance in who you are in this system of caste, because just when you were born, it's like, wow, that is a very powerful acceptance of just what's going on. And man, I mean, there's a reason it's banished and was horrible, and slavery, like all this horrendous things have happened because of some of these power structures. So again, I don't know if I'm just like not choosing a side here and just like being radically neutral and saying like there's good in both. When I think of power, I mean, we had a really funny conversation yesterday about like 80s cocaine business America. That like a lot of the power in this country, like in the current power structure of who's in charge, was like probably doing a lot of cocaine and like selling stocks. And it's a very fascinating thing to be like, oh, that's pretty gross behavior, and like, wow, that somehow that has manifested them running this country, right? So it's just like we were just teasing out that like, okay, generally that is a no, and I don't want to be a part of that. And like, whoa, where's the magic in there? Because it's like there's clearly something, and sure, cocaine makes you work fast, I guess, but there is a drive, and sure, I think it's like misused ingredients, but there is like a drive that is giving back to the intensity and competitive fire that has manifested power. And so I think some of these paths are really poisonous and slippery. like, but I think to tease out the goodness in both sides of what we're talking about, and then teasing out the goodness, and then infusing them together to say, those forces can then collaborate and to create like a very pure and nuanced way forward. To me, that's the view. That's the view that I'm choosing to embody in practice. And it's kind of what helps me navigate business worlds and what to do with my own life, is teasing that stuff out of my own experience, the last time I felt sane. And the teasing out the goodness in capitalism, which you're doing a great job of doing, but then also teasing out the greatness in activism and in radical opposition of what's going on, and then taking that in your own way, in your own experiences, and finding some sort of compass and some sort of intensity that you can then act from. And that's what I am trying to do. Failing hard, succeeding really hard. Like I've been on totally both sides, but that is definitely my current compass that I'm really tracking towards.
Yeah. Feels like a pretty great note to be closing on. I don't have much more unless you want to keep adding, riffing.
No, man, beautiful. I think that's a great closing riff. And just to advocate for what you're saying, like maybe you're being totally neutral. You said that, and yeah, I feel like you're just speaking to the idea that maybe it's not about the game. Maybe it's about the player playing the game, and that's not necessarily neutral. That's just, I think, beautifully nuanced, and it gives people permission. Like if you do feel a calling to playing some of these games in bigger ways, just remembering that it's about the player, and it kind of gives space for your calling to move, where otherwise there might be a hard wall that says you can't go there. So I love this, man, and it's been so great having you here. It's really special to get to sit down with people that I've known for a long time, but in this setting that really just brings out a different quality. And you're a wealth of wisdom, honestly, and I don't just say that. And really appreciated this conversation so much.
And just to clarify here, are you saying, as we're putting a bow on this, don't hate the player, hate the game?
Yes.
I think that's what I heard. Look, everyone, don't hate the player, hate the game. Any other closing words? Do you want to have any closing words? Where should people
smash the like button?
You have some links you want to send up?
Yeah, I have the links in my bio.
Yeah.
No,
I OnlyFans page.
I have zero. If people want to read my thesis, they can email me. Yeah. That's dope. Oh, you're right. That's slippery.
Russian
hate mail, diss tracks. Yeah, you can inquire about things that I've written, but they're very few and far between.
Yes. You'll have to send a Falcon if you want his thesis, I believe.
Yeah, Falcon is preferable. Yeah, they're fast. Thank you, brothers. Great talking.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for being on.